Good morning, everyone. This is Martin Murphy from the ILO Department of Communication. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the launch of the World Employment and Social Outlook 2021 report, the role of digital labor platforms in transforming the world of work. With us today, we have ILO Director General Guy Ryder and Uma Rani, ILO senior researcher from the ILO Research Department. You will have received the press release and also the report. Just a reminder that the embargo lifts at 2 p.m. Geneva time. That's 1 p.m. GMT. We will start with a brief introduction by the Director General, and then we'll move on to the question and answers. The press conference will be done in English. When it's your turn to speak, I'll ask you to please identify yourselves, the outlet that you represent, and as usual, you can raise your hand to ask the questions, and I'll call on you. Okay, having said that, let's begin. So I'll give the floor to the DG. DG, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning, everybody, colleagues of the media, and welcome to this briefing on the new edition of the ILO's World Employment and Social Outlook, which this time focuses on how digital labor platforms are increasingly shaping the world of work and the future of work, and are indeed becoming a very notable part of our everyday lives. Now, as the report says, digital labor platforms are creating new job opportunities, providing flexible work arrangements for certain workers, particularly women, persons with disabilities, young people, and they are fostering as well new business opportunities, especially in developing countries. But these platforms are also changing the very organization of work. They are increasingly redefining how economic relationships are established through technology between workers and clients or customers, and this is taking place across the globe. And this has created new challenges, both for workers and for businesses, and we believe that these challenges need to be addressed. To assess the potential impact of digital labor platforms, we need precise and reliable estimates on how they are transforming the world of work, and this is what our report tries to do by giving a comprehensive overview of how these platforms are indeed changing things. The report draws on the findings from surveys and interviews conducted by the ILO with some 12,000 workers and representatives of 85 businesses around the world and in multiple sectors. So let me give you a few numbers. The past decade has seen a 5-fold increase in the number of digital labor platforms. They are concentrated in a few countries, mainly in the United States and to a lesser extent in India and in the United Kingdom. And this in itself has created a growing digital divide between different parts of the world. And this has been accentuated by the fact that 96% of all investments in these platforms are concentrated in North America, Europe, and Asia. And over and above that, in 2019, about 70% of the revenues generated by digital labor platforms, were concentrated in just 2 countries, the United States with 49% and China with 22%. Now, these figures give a very broad overview of the situation, but I want to also highlight some of the key points highlighted in the report, and then I and my colleague Uma Rani, who's with me and who led the team which authored this report, will be happy to try to respond to your questions. Now, how are digital labor platforms transforming the world of work? Well, firstly, these platforms are further blurring the distinction between employees and the self-employed. And this has had very major implications, it's very much in the news these days, for workers' well-being and working conditions. This is particularly the case in middle and low-income countries. For workers, the challenges relate primarily to their working conditions, to social protection, to the regularity of work and income, and access to their fundamental rights at work, including notably the right to organize, freedom of association, and the right to bargain collectively. But digital labor platforms are also changing the way workers access the labor market. Sometimes workers have to pay to work through a commission or a fee, and usually these fees are determined entirely unilaterally by the platforms. Workers also frequently struggle to find sufficient well-paid work to earn a decent income, and many do not have access to social protection, and this has become a particular point of concern, obviously, in the course of the current pandemic. Moreover, workers are also often unable to engage in collective bargaining that would allow them to have the way to address some of these issues. Algorithms are also defining and altering how workers are hired and remunerated and how businesses are paid or rewarded. Now, algorithms are far from neutral. They're coded by human programmers based on a set of norms and instructions, and if bias is fed into the system, it can result in discriminatory practices. The practice of outsourcing is also creating major disruptions as well. In many instances, work is outsourced by businesses in the global north and then performed by workers in the global south. Now, governments have started to address some of the issues related to working conditions on digital labor platforms, and in some cases, this has extended to social security, to occupational safety and health, the coverage of occupational and health measures to platform workers. They have sometimes classified such workers as employees and not self-employed, or they have ensured that they could have access data related to their platform activities. In addition, soft law initiatives have been undertaken in national jurisdictions by governments and by social partners, workers and employers organizations. And trade unions have been helping associations of platform workers with legal challenges. But because of the nature of this phenomenon, country-level solutions are not going to be enough, for the simple reason that platforms operate all over the world, across multiple jurisdictions. And so the only way to effectively protect workers and businesses is a coherent and coordinated international effort. There is a need, and it's an urgent need, for international policy discussion and coordination that would be, I think, crucial to find common regulatory solutions and to reinforce the fact that universal labor standards are and must be applicable to everybody, to all working people. Irrespective of whether platform workers are classified as employees or as self-employed, whether they work in Asia or in Europe, they should all enjoy the right to associate, to bargain collectively, and to be protected against discriminatory conduct and unsafe workplaces. In other words, a simple way to put it is that what is unacceptable in the analog world of work should also be unacceptable in the digital one. And our report includes several recommendations about what needs to be done to respond to these challenges. And let me just highlight some of those which are amongst those recommendations. The first is ensuring that workers' employment status is correctly classified and in accordance with national classification systems. We need then to ensure transparency and accountability of algorithms for workers and for businesses. We need to ensure that self-employed platform workers enjoy the right to bargain collectively. And we need to ensure that all workers, including platform workers, have access to adequate social security benefits through the extension and the adaptation of policy and legal frameworks where that is necessary. Perhaps I can add and conclude by saying that in 2019, the ILO's Independent Global Commission on the Future of Work called for an international governance system that requires platforms and their clients to respect certain minimum rights and protections. Now, as I've said on previous occasions, since the pandemic began, We can only solve global problems, global challenges with global responses. And I think that this holds true as well for digital labour platform. And this is why we need to come together to ensure that these platforms provide decent work opportunities and foster the growth of sustainable businesses. And the point here, I think, is that the report that we're presenting today provides a basis of evidence and puts forward, I think, in very clear terms, some of the policy challenges that stand out, and also make the case for international dialogue and action to respond. So that's the report that we're putting out today. Now, Uma and myself will be happy to respond to any questions that you may have. And I hand it back to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go over now to the questions. First one on the list is Peter Kenny. Peter, over to you.
Thanks for taking my question. As an employee who's totally dependent on these digital platforms, I'm a freelance journalist. I'm interested in the how. How are we going to solve these questions? Who is going to negotiate with whom? Because we now have these algorithm generators, which are the powers that are there, and we have self-employed people. So who are you going to get these international agreements between, and how are you going to do it? Thank you very much, Director General.
Well, let me have a first stab at that, and then maybe Uma will want to supplement my comments. I think the point that I would like to make in this regard is that this is the issues that you're talking about, and which our report highlights, issues of public policy interest. These are areas where, and it's classically the case in the world of work throughout history, new circumstances, new realities in the world of work call forth appropriate policy responses. Now, clearly, there are multiple places in which such responses may take shape. It's quite telling, I think, that at the moment it's in the courts of law where the policy responses are most evident. We saw what happened in the UK recently, and it's one in a series of legal determinations. But it seems to me as well that this is a matter of interest to governments, and that governments working with employers, be it the major tech enterprises themselves or other parts of business, and of course organized labor, we have to work out how we wish these digital labor platforms to operate, how they should be regulated, what is, as I said, acceptable and what not. And there again, I think we don't want to take a one-sided sort of take on these challenges. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. And our report makes very, very clear that the very dynamic growth of labor platforms can be and is being a source of employment opportunity as well. So who? It's all of us. It's government, it's international institutions, it's regional institutions, it's a business community. And it's classically an area where dialogue needs to take place to work our way forwards. Uma, do you want to add something?
Yeah. Thank you, DG. And thank you very much for this question. I think Director General Guy Ryder put it very rightly, the different stakeholders which could be involved in this international social policy dialogue. I'd just like to point out one thing, that this has already been done in the case of Helfer Agreement, that is a cleaning platform in Denmark, where we had the government, we had the employers, and we had the union actually coming together and trying to see how to protect the workers. And I think the case was taken up in the Competition Council, and following that up, what's very interesting is that Helfer went about arguing that it would still like to protect its super helpers and provide them with all the benefits that they are entitled to. So there's already one step that has been taken. I think we have to move forward and see how we could take such steps at a larger scale. Thank you.
Okay, let's go next to Antonio Broto from EFE. Over to you.
Good morning. So I would like to know if there's some estimations on how many people is working in these digital platforms. And when the report says that this sector has grown fivefold, does it mean in terms of number of employees or number of companies, number of revenues? If you can clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to just confide to you that before the press conference began, this is exactly the point I put to Uma. It is extraordinarily difficult, and our report is not very explicit on this. It's very, very difficult to say how many people constitute the digital platform labor force. Why? Because the platforms themselves do not share this information. It's not easy to have access to that information. And secondly, the variety of circumstances militates against providing exact numbers. Do you include somebody who may work 1 or 2 hours a week, somebody who works 65 hours a week on a platform, and both of those things happen? And how do you aggregate that? So we are extremely cautious in trying to give a rounded figure about the digital platform workforce. But Uma, who's been wrestling with this problem, will add greater detail to what I've said.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to add 2 points to what DG Guy Ryder has already said. Yes, it's very difficult to get any estimate. So what the report has gone about doing is looking at about 5 selected major platforms which are online, and we tried to actually get the data to see what is the regularity of work that is being done by the workers. And again, among the 5 platforms, you find that the number of registered workers who actually regularly do work ranges between 0.1% to 27%. So given that enormity of difference that is there, it's very difficult to even do any modeling exercise or to come up with a reliable estimate which says this is the number that is there. Now, when we talk about the 5-fold increase, we are talking about the number of platforms that have increased over the past decade, that is between 2010 and 2020. And much of this increase has actually happened in the 3 countries that were highlighted by the DG, that is United States, India, and United Kingdom. And what we have also seen over the past decade is that both the fundings and the revenues have actually increased enormously, and again concentrating in certain regions, that is Asia, Europe, and United States.
Okay, let's go now to...
I think the number of platforms, just to complement that, it's gone up 5-fold, and the figure is now 777
yes,
that we mentioned in the report.
Absolutely.
Yep. 777.
All right, let's go now to Laurent Sierro from the Swiss news agency Keystone ATS. Laurent, over to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for the briefing. Actually, it was quite a similar question, but I'll try anyway. Is there a way to seize the share of the burden between the people in the north and the people in the south, as you mentioned that there are a huge number of people working in the south for north companies in that field? And then is there also a way to figure whether there are much more employees than self-employed people in the field? Thank you.
Yeah, let me perhaps begin to answer your question. It's a very, very broad question by making a distinction which is very present in the report between those digital platforms online which enable a worker on one side of the world to provide a service to a company on the other side of the world, where location is no object. That's one set of digital platforms. And another set of digital platforms which are location-based. So if you're ordering food or you want to get a taxi, location matters. If you want to get a document translated, well, frankly, location doesn't matter. So there are 2 distinct, I think, categories within this overall classification of digital labor platforms. And yes, you do have this, at the risk of simplifying things somewhat, this situation in which the global south is providing services and work for platforms in the global north. And this obviously creates major issues. On the one hand, and this is the positive side of the balance sheet, this is a potentially very, very important creation of job opportunities in locations where perhaps those opportunities are all too scarce. And these may be quite attractive for certain sectors of the workforce in the global south. That's a good thing. On the other hand, you then run into all of the issues, because of multiple jurisdictions in particular, about what type of pay rates are appropriate to that type of situation, and the dangers, frankly, of unfair competition creeping into the equation. Now, to be very honest with you, we're just beginning to get into these issues, and I think that we have to address these matters in the way that we've already described through the type of multi-stakeholder dialogues that we want to promote internationally. I think we have to work out, and it's not going to be a small task, how we optimize all of those positive opportunities that could be generated in certain countries, whilst minimizing the equally important challenges in terms of working conditions and pay rates. Now, that's about what I can say at this point. I'm going to ask Uma, who's closer to the issues than I am, to come in. But what I want to say is these are circumstances that require urgent attention, and they, by the definition, require that attention to be at the international level, because if not, we won't have the means to address the key issues, because they spill over issues that are specific to national jurisdictions. Uma.
Thank you, DG. Thank you very much for this question. I'd like to just supplement one thing, to take the distinction between location-based platforms and also online web-based platforms. When you're talking about employees and self-employed, the way we try to distinguish is in the online web-based platforms where work is remotely done, is whether a worker is working for the same client over a continuous period of time. And if a worker is working with the same client, then it's a very clear employer-employee relationship. And also what matters is the entire mode and process of working, which is taken into consideration as we go around discussing the whole employment relationship question in our regulatory chapter. Now, when it comes to location-based platforms, what's very interesting is, as DG Guy very clearly mentioned, the entire work process is algorithmically managed. The entire process of allocating work, monitoring work, and evaluating and rewarding work, it does not look as though it's a self-employed worker having control and autonomy over the work. Rather, it's much more a very clear employer-employee relationship that exists. And some of the code decisions that have come out have actually related to this matter. So this is exactly what the report goes about discussing in detail. Thank you.
Okay, let's go now to Karl Moeder from ARD Radio Studio Zurich.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking my question. The pandemic had a huge impact on digital world, like a boost with the home office and all this stuff. Are you able to elaborate a little bit on that? How it boosted in maybe different speeds in different areas of the world? And can you tell if this development over the last 12 months has resulted awareness of all these issues you tackled already and talk about? And maybe you see some models that, or some countries that could function as a role model within the last 12 months during pandemic? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, let me have a first go at responding to the important question. I think the first thing to say is that very clearly during the pandemic we have seen, I think, what may fairly be described as an acceleration of certain tendencies that were already in evidence pre-pandemic. This move towards greater digitalization, greater remote working. The question remains to be answered. How much of that will be temporary, will be reversed when the pandemic recedes, and how much of this will leave a permanent result on the world of work? I think the probable answer is that it will leave, to a certain extent, a permanent change, but not perhaps to the degree that some who talk about the generalization of remote working sometimes argue. Now, let's be clear. One thing is working from home, remote working. Digital labour platforms are a quite distinct phenomenon. There's interlinkages here, but they're not the same thing. And what our report does, and Uma, I'd be grateful to you for specifying the evidence that we present, what the report does is present what's happened in some respects to digital labour workers in the course of the pandemic. And I think, for example, of the evidence that we have on the impact on delivery workers, some of whom have seen demand for their work reduced quite substantially. So there are very clear immediate impacts. And I'll also say, do I see any country that's emerging as a model of good practice? I couldn't identify one at this stage. I wouldn't want to go there. But what I do think we are seeing is an underlining of the importance of the critical message of our report, that in this time of transformational change, where digital technologies are really taking center stage, we do need to grasp, and it's in the nature of things that realities on the ground move more quickly than our capacity to respond to them. It really is urgent that I think it's fair to say, we catch up and do so quickly, and I hope that our report will help us do that. Uma.
Thank you, DG. I'll just respond to the two questions with regard to what we actually see since the beginning of the pandemic. We have been tracking, along with the Oxford Internet Institute, 5 major online platforms. And what we saw there very clearly was that there was a rise in demand for such work from businesses, and also an increase in supply for work from largely the developing countries, but also from some of the developed countries. So clearly, going through the entire year 2020, you see a rise in demand and supply of such work. So this is a phenomena that is going to be there. Where you see a difference is across countries. You have countries like India, where there is much more higher demand from both businesses and also from the workers. Whereas on the other hand, you see United States, where the demand is not as much as you see the supply of workers there. So on the whole, overall, globally, you do see an increase. Now, with regard to understanding the impact of the COVID on taxi and delivery workers, we sort of did a very quick, rapid assessment survey in 4 countries, India, Kenya, Chile, and Mexico, in August of last year. And what we found there was 9 out of 10 delivery workers found that the demand for their work actually declined. And so it was the case with that of the taxi drivers. Now, many of these workers actually tried to compensate for the loss of income by either moving out from urban areas, or by reducing consumption, or by actually sending the families back to the villages or towns, and by actually borrowing money. So this was the state of affairs that many of the workers were forced to live in. In addition, many of them took the risk of actually going and working because they had to feed their families, and they did not have any sort of a social security benefit. And in case of COVID, in case they contracted COVID, they also at times actually took the risk of doing the work without taking off, because there was no support mechanism that was there. So this is what we found from our surveys.
And if you'll allow me just to supplement what Uma said, because it's got more general application. Where there is a lack of social protection, for example, access to sick pay, which is the case for many delivery workers in particular, you have a big problem. You have a big problem both as a matter of individual well-being and safety and health, and as a matter of public health policy, because a worker who tests positive or is symptomatic, who continues to work, is a danger not only to themselves, but a danger for public health. And it really does underline the importance of access, universal access, to adequate social protection for digital platform workers and indeed for all other workers.
Thanks. Carl, you had a quick follow-up question. So I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Agnes. So Carl, back to you, please.
Okay, so sorry again. Could you please elaborate? It's not really a follow-up, but could you please elaborate a little bit? What are typical work duties on these platforms to color the picture a little bit?
I'll go straight to Uma on that one, I think.
Yeah. Okay, when we are talking about online, I guess your question relates more to the online web-based platform because location is very clear. It's either a taxi worker or a delivery worker. Now, when we are talking about online web-based platform, what we have identified in our report are 3 types of platforms: the competitive programming platforms, the microtask, and the freelance. So I'll start with the most simple one, the competitive programming platforms. They are largely used by companies to actually find solutions to some of their software development problem. So what they do is they actually outsource a problem onto a community of coders or programmers who actually compete with one another for a prize money and undertake the task. Now, this kind of a competitive programming platform actually helps businesses to get innovative ideas, but at the same time reducing costs. But also a lot of young professionals are actually using these platforms to hone their skills. Then you have microtask platforms, which are largely used for data annotation or image annotation. So if you get onto a website today, like the Amazon, and you find all your products very neatly categorized, actually it's not algorithmically done. It's done by workers behind that machine. So that's the kind of task they do. Similarly, automation of cars. We talk a lot about it. We talk about driverless cars. Actually, to reach that stage, you need workers who are actually doing this behind and annotating images. Now, freelance work is something that we've had in the offline world. And this includes a range of tasks from transcription, translation, project management, fundraising, doing experiments for biologists. So it's a huge range of different tasks that workers actually do, where you're paid either on the basis of an hour or on the basis of a task. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go now to Agnes Pedrero from AFP, please.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. I didn't read the whole report so far, but I read the press release, and it said that half of the workers in these platforms, digital platforms in the US, are paid less than $2 the hour. I wanted to know if you have global figures on their salaries of these type of workers. And also you mentioned the fact that these platforms are having big differences on the salaries between men and women. So if you have some figures about that to explain with figures. And listening to you, I'm not sure to understand what is the main problem with those platforms for you. Is it the fact that these people are less paid? Thank you.
Well, let me just answer that last bit, and then we'll go for the detail to Uma. I think when you get a chance to look at the report, you will see, and I want to repeat, it's a balanced report. We point to the opportunities that come through digital labour platforms, but we look also at the challenges, and they're multiple. Yes, they're about pay rates, they're about social protection, they're about conditions of work, access to social protection, and issues of employment status, independent, self-employed, lie behind many of these issues. So I don't think you can say there is one major problem here. I mean, this is a new way of organizing work. And when you have such a transformational phenomenon as this, I think almost inevitably that generates a whole series of challenges and policy issues that need to be confronted, and they go right across the board. So that's why I would try to respond to your last point. But on pay and wages and the gender aspects, there is a lot in our report, and Uma's going to set that out for you. And I'm just going to preface what she says by saying there is a distinction, Uma, isn't there, between hours which are actually paid work and unpaid work, because workers have to actually be active on platforms, doing things for which they do not receive remuneration.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for these questions. To your question about what is the average hourly earnings that we find globally, that is about $3.4. And we say that half of these workers actually earn less than $2.1 per hour. Now, the differences between men and women is not so high. Overall average, it's $5 for men and $4.8 for women. But actually, when it gets down to the country levels, there you find huge differences, and also across the different platforms, you find huge differences. One of the things that we found, which was something that we knew from our earlier surveys too, was that there was a huge difference in the pay between developing and developed countries, and developing country workers earn almost 60% less than that of workers from developed countries. Now, what are the reasons why you have these differences between different types of workers, that is either by gender or by the location of base that they are from? The reason is, part of it is the platform design itself, which sort of discriminates certain workers from certain locations from actually participating on certain activities. Though we all think that technology is gender neutral or neutral in all senses, but we realize that because of the design of the platform by humans, a lot of these discriminatory biases are actually being brought in. Now, with regard to the gender pay gap, other thing that we do find is that even after controlling for various characteristics, you do find that women earn less than men in certain countries and on certain platforms. If I were to say, apart from what DG Guy Ryder has said about the various problems that we have on the platforms, one thing that strikes to us as researchers, at least coming from the ILO, is that workers on these platforms have to pay to get the work. They pay a commission fee. And that is something that you do not see in the offline world. And the second thing that he alluded to was the unpaid time that the workers have to put, for which they are never paid. And I think all of this is very important from the point of ensuring that workers have minimum incomes.
Agnes, you had a follow-up question? We're trying to unmute you, Agnes.
Yes, sorry.
There you go.
I'm sorry. So it's a follow-up on the figure. You say you were talking, is it the salary per hour? And then if you could give concrete examples of what they have to do, what they have to work and being not paid. Because not everybody knows about that, and it would be good to give concrete examples so our readers can understand.
Yes, sure. So when we talk about unpaid work, there are different things that actually get accounted to it. One is searching for the task itself. It is not, there's a lot talked about the flexibility on these platforms. It's not as though you open up a computer and you have jobs or tasks actually coming to you. You have to spend a lot of time looking for the jobs. So that's one unpaid time. The second unpaid time is you sometimes finish the work, you submit the work, but your work gets rejected. And there's absolutely no reason given as to why the work is rejected. Similarly, on competitive programming platforms, you participate, you do the entire programming, you actually spend hours and hours doing the work, but at the end of the day, you might not get any remuneration or not win a prize. On freelance platforms, you actually build your profile. You build your portfolio. So you spend a lot of your own time actually building all of this and applying for varied jobs, and you might get 1 in 10 jobs. So that's what we call as unpaid time that is spent by the worker on these platforms.
And the salaries you mentioned are per hour.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Yeah, the salaries I mentioned are per hour. Thank you.
Okay, Antonio, you had a second question, so I'm coming back to you now.
Thank you. So I would like to know if you have been able to reach the big platforms, let's say Uber, Deliveroo, to show your results and your suggestions, if they are easy to reach, because sometimes they look like just a network of workers. I don't know if there's a boss there. And what's their attitude to your, if you have been able to talk with them, what's their attitude to your to the ILO asking for more dignified work for the employees of these platforms? Thank you very much.
Well, Uma might have something to say in terms of the preparation of the report. I have had the opportunity to share platforms with some of the major representatives of some of the major companies involved, and it's quite interesting. And that was particularly in the context of the ILO's centenary in 2019, when we were talking about the future of work. And I think at that time, and I remember sharing platforms with Uber in particular, the platform companies were very anxious to present themselves both as a major part of the future of work and as a positive part of the future of work. And obviously, and you would expect this, to emphasize the very positive aspects of their operations. But, and I have to recognize this, there was, at that time at least, an interest in talking, an interest in having the discussions with the ILO, at least, concerning the future of their industry, the future of their operations. And my hope is, it remains to be seen if that hope will be borne out, that this report that we've presented, which I repeat, presents a great deal of evidence. I genuinely believe that there's a lot in this report that has not been pulled together in one place previously. I think it's a terrific, I'm going to use the phrase, platform for a dialogue to continue, to have a very objective, evidence-based discussion on the opportunities and the challenges of this type of ways of working, and that we will be able to engage the companies concerned. And I repeat, this is not simply a choice of the companies themselves. This is a matter of public policy as well. And I suspect that we will be seeing our member states, our governments, as well as our worker and employer constituents wanting to engage companies in this type of debate. I think it's absolutely essential that this dialogue takes place. But Uma, anything specific to the report?
Yeah. I'd just like to mention that as part of the business chapter of this report, we did try getting in touch with the platform companies in the countries where we were working, and also online web-based. We did manage to talk to country office in Kenya of Uber and some other 15 platform companies. But it's not easy. It's very difficult to reach. And sometimes they just want certain questions to answer certain questions that we have written rather than having a dialogue. So it's been a difficult process, but I do believe that with this report, we will be having the opportunity to have the dialogue and have a discussion about some of these issues.
Okay, Boris, I see that you sent a question through the chat, but unfortunately it's not very clear. So if you could take the floor, we'll unmute you now. I don't know if you have access to a mic or not. If not, I'll ask you to please get in touch with us. There. Are you there, Boris?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Boris. Go ahead, please.
I was just asking what, beside the greed of the current winners of the system, can you see as obstacle to the implementation of what you advocate?
Well, I think there are major challenges, and with the challenges are obstacles. One of the key points here is that this is by definition, an international phenomenon that requires an international response. And that's already an obstacle, because we know from the court cases that are going through in the UK, in California, in Geneva, by the way, as well, that these issues tend to be dealt with within national jurisdictions, within national legislative frameworks. And we have to get beyond that. Otherwise, I fear that a number of the key issues will simply not be addressed. So we need to get this debate into the international arena. I think that is a most important obstacle that we need to overcome. Drawing on what Uma's just said, we have to test, I think, the propensity, the appetite of key stakeholders to engage in the debate. And I've given you my own experience, and Uma's explained what the experience of preparing this report was. But we need people to come to the table as well. And clearly there are major interests. There are some issues upon which opinion is quite strongly divergent. I mean, the simple issue of employment status has already brought that to the surface. So we have to overcome these things. And there is an inherent complexity as well to some of the issues. They're fundamental, but they're complex as well. So we just have to take these things on.
Okay, let me pause for a few seconds to see if there are any other questions. And if not, I'll ask the Director General to just close this press briefing.
Well, thanks, Martin, and thanks again to all our colleagues from the media for your interest. I just really want to reiterate that I believe that the report that we are launching today is a beginning. It's a beginning in two senses. I think it breaks new ground in presenting in some detail reliable and comprehensive information about the current state of the digital labour platform sector, and from that bringing out what I believe to be crucial policy challenges that arise. That is a first beginning. And then, of course, as we chew over the evidence and the issues, I think it has to be the beginning of the type of process of developing coordinated policy responses based on this increased understanding. I think that this is a first step in a process in the treatment of issues that will probably become increasingly center stage in our own organization, here in the International Labour Organization, but frankly, for policymakers across the world for the coming decades. So I think this is, as I say, the beginning of something which is of very great significance for the future of the world of work.
Okay, thank you, DG. Thank you, Uma, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions. If you have any follow-up questions, please get in touch with newsroom@ilo.org. A reminder that the embargo lifts at 1400 Geneva time, 2 p.m. Geneva time. And we will send the audio of the press briefing right away, and the video of the press conference will be uploaded to the website once the embargo lifts. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much once again. Take care. Be safe. Bye-bye.